Okay, in terms of the stuff, as usual, most of it's bad news. Example 1, quizzes part 2, deadline to file October 16th. So not this Friday, but next Friday. Example 2, quizzes part 3, deadline to file November 13th. Example 3, example 4, quizzes part 4, deadline December 4th. Example 5, deadline is December 11th at noon. These others are end of day, so 11 to 9 to 9 p.m. For the draft, if you want to do one, deadline November 16th. For the final version of the paper, turn in by Blackboard. +5 deadline November 18th. 4-credit deadline November 25th. And half-credit deadline December 4th. Last time we were looking at our good dead friend John Duns Scotus, who did a lot of stuff, died, so did today. Before moving along to the new stuff, anything about the stuff to be, or the stuff that has been, it needs more stuff. Okay, so to finish up John Duns Scotus, we saw last time, in the ancient days of Friday, that he was of all interest. His view being that essentially that God's will is God's primary attribute. And so God being, all-powerful means that God can will anything that he wishes. And because of this, at least according to Scotus, we can't discern morality by reason. We can't look at the world and say, aha, the world's like this, therefore we ought to be this way. What we have to do is rely on the divine commandment view, which is we have to figure out what God commands and follow that. Now, he does allow some seeming exceptions to the command rule. First one is this. The command to love God is the only moral law he sees as concerned with something intrinsically good. So he does claim that if we go with the 10 commandments, the top 10 rules, that the first set are what he considers to be rationally necessary moral truths. So kind of the one exception to the basic idea of divine command theory, that what God says is good because he says so, is the first 4 commandments. Because Scotus contends, perhaps incorrectly, that God loves himself, and this requires the first 4 commandments follow logically from that. And these are, of course, having no gods before the one true God, no graven images, no taking the Lord's name in vain, bless you, and keeping the Sabbath holy. And so he claims that out of God's self-love, it'd be a contradiction not to command those. But the other 6 commandments are, we can look at it as optional. God could have commanded their opposites. He could have said, go and kill a lot of stuff, covet thy neighbor, commit adultery, etc. And so for Scotus, his view is that except for those 4 first commandments, all the rest is up to God's will. And it's still a popular view to this day, the idea that what makes things good is God commands them. You just figure out what God commands, do that, you're doing good. Figure out what God forbids, don't do that. If you're not doing it, you're avoiding doing bad. Before closing the section on ethics and religion, with some problems with ethics and religion, anything about Scotus that needs more stuff. Okay. Now, as an example of divine command theory, well, one class example, of course, the Bible. We'll hop over that to the problems. Now, interestingly, importantly enough, one of the classic problems for divine command theory actually predates, monotheistic divine command theory by many centuries. It's what's called the Euthyphro Problem. And whenever someone trots out divine command theory, someone else will trot out the Euthyphro Problem. And here's the problem. It was developed by our good dead friend Plato in the dialogue the Euthyphro, in which the character of Socrates is Socratizing with Euthyphro about the matter of piety. Now, I included the dialogue as like a free bonus in the free book, and also in the notes as a free bonus to the free notes. So it's like, I guess it's not a true bonus because it's free anyway. I think it's more free stuff. Still more free stuff. So good. Now, the idea behind the objection is this, and I'll present it as the objection against divine command theory rather than go through the whole Euthyphro thing. The problem presented as this. Are things good because God commands them, or does God command them because they're good? So why does this become a problem? Well, basically here's the problem. If God commands stuff because it's good, then the goodness of these things is independent of divine command theory, independent of God. Therefore, divine command theory would be false. Now, if things are good because God commands them, then that would seem to be a matter of arbitrariness, that whatever God says is good because he says so. That seems problematic because that seems totally arbitrary. So we end up with a dilemma. Either divine command theory is just straight up false, or it's completely arbitrary, which some regard as a problem. So, boil it down quite a bit, that's just the Euthyphro Problem. You know, are things good because God commands them, or does God command them because they're good? Going one option makes divine command theory false, so much the worse divine command theory. The other approach seems to make morality arbitrary, which is seen as a problem by some. Now, another very practical problem is this. Divine command theory, again, is the view that what you should do is what God commands and avoid what he forbids. All you gotta do is know what God commands and what he forbids. Now, of course, people might say, well, that's easy. There's a book that tells us exactly what we should do. And that book, of course, is the Bible. It could be the Bible or something. Not everyone buys the Bible, of course, literally or figuratively. It could be the Quran. It could be the teachings of the Compassionate Buddha. It could be buns of steel, all depending on what type of religion you get going on. Yeah, and so one point of concern is there's all types of different religions. So the question is, which one of these has got it right? And the answer is easy and obvious. If you ask anyone, they have the one true view. They're right. Anyone who disagrees is wrong. But then the problem is that since everyone's got different views, who really has got it right for real? And of course everyone thinks it's them, but how do you decide who really has got it right? So with all these different religions, we don't really know what to do. I mean, we know what we think. I know exactly what I think, and you know exactly what you think, but then the problem is all those other people who believe in different stuff. So who's really truly got God's word? Now, of course, there's also, as mentioned, there's all kinds of different religious texts. And you might say like the Bible, but even the Bible, you get a lot of editions. King James versions, you've got, all the translations. And if you go to like, on the web, one thing they have these kind of handy is they'll have a web page if you're doing research. They'll show all the different versions of the, not all the versions, many of the versions of the Bible, with how stuff is translated or presented differently. And the differences do make a difference. And so you have to decide which one of those has got it right. So once you got the right book, you have to decide which translation of the book has got it right. And then all you got to do is, of course, look at the interpretation. Which interpretation has got it right? Because people interpret things differently. For example, well, if we take, the Bible says, that God says that, this is my great commandment to you, that you love each other as I have loved you. And some people think that means, well, we should take care of each other, be nice and kind to each other. And other people think, God means something different. He's not talking about, Mexicans or immigrants or foreigners or people we don't like or homosexuals or anybody we don't like. We don't have to love those folks. And so there's different interpretations. So there's a very practical problem. Laying aside, kind of sarcasm, there are many different religions, many different texts, many different interpretations, and every one of us thinks we're right. I think I'm totally right in my views, otherwise I wouldn't believe them. You think you're totally right in your views, otherwise you wouldn't believe them. But we all can't be right. And there's also the possibility that we could all be wrong. Every one of us could be totally wrong. There could be no right person. We could all just be wrong in varying degrees. And so deciding to figure out what we need to do, we've got to answer that question. Which is the true command of God? Everybody thinks they got it. Kim Davis thinks they've got it. ISIS, those guys, they think they got a direct line to God. Pope
claims a direct line to God. Kim Davis claims a direct line to God. Mike Huckabee, everybody claims it. Everyone disagrees, and the problem is figuring out who's got God right. Now, a much more abstract problem is the metaphysical problem. Some people say, hey, morality is, about people interacting with people and stuff here on Earth. So bringing in all this funky metaphysics is too much. We don't need to get all metaphysical about morality. We just need, relations among people here. And then, of course, the obvious reply to that is, well, maybe ethics does require that metaphysical stuff. So if it does, then there's no objection. If it doesn't, then I guess the objection is fine. Last two problems. God's goodness. Now, God is supposed to be perfectly good. Under divine command theory, that literally translates as God is perfectly commanded by God, which is either nonsense or circular. And it seems to be a bit of a problem, because, again, people want to say that God is good, but that seems to require a conception of good apart from God. And then one of the more serious problems, again, is if we are somehow able to solve like these problems, there is a problem of arbitrariness. The idea being, as Scotus said, so for Scotus, this is a feature, not a bug. But for critics, it's a bug, not a feature. The idea is that since God could will anything, anything can be good or anything could be evil. So God, as Scotus himself says, God could have made the Ten Commandments differently. It could have been, thou shalt kill, thou shalt commit adultery, thou shalt bear false witness, thou shalt covet. And that would have been good. Those commands would have been given by God, so they would be good. And of course, critics say that morality shouldn't be so arbitrary. But of course, some people who work in divine command theory say what God says goes, because he's God. And so people have been, raising various criticisms against divine command theory. Before pressing on, anything about that stuff? It needs more stuff. Now here are couple of concerns, three concerns in fact, in regards to morality and religion. One sort of interesting approach is this. People's moral intuitions and actual moral practices often tend to go against stated religious views. For example, to use some of the obvious ones, the stoning of children. I use this as an example back in Appeal to Intuition. Now, according to the Old Testament, disobedient children are to be stoned in public. But intuitively, do you think that that's something we should do? Should sassy kids be taken out and stoned to death?
No.
Probably not. So one point of concern is that conflict. Because when we bring forth, say, religious-based ethics, we do look at it in terms of our moral intuitions, and we do look at it in terms of how we actually have morality today. Now, one of the stock answers is times change. People say, well, if you look at the Old Testament, it's old. It says so right in the title. And times change. So stoning kids back then was, I guess what you did, because they didn't have YouTube, I suppose, or Netflix. And today we do things differently. Times have changed. But of course, a fair question is, how far can you go with that? How much can you change and still keep the religious ethics? What things can we say, yeah, it's okay to go to Red Lobster because Leviticus doesn't apply anymore, but no same-sex marriage because Leviticus totally applies today. And so there is a challenge of picking out, which ones you stick with, which ones you don't, which ties into the second one. Interestingly, as a point of this ties back to consistency, is often when people base their morality on religious ethics, it's a very selective approach that what people will often do is they'll pick the things that match their own moral views and say, my religion says this, but then conveniently ignores things they disagree with. An excellent example of this recently was Pope Francis. Comes to the U.S., he's the Pope. He's the, supposedly infallible in regard to Catholic doctrine. He's the guy in charge of the Catholic Church. And what's interesting, of course, when he came to Congress, the Republicans, when he gave like a pro-life statements, they were cheering, he's our guy, he's pro-life, anti-abortion. And when he expressed concerns, they would take his concerns about same-sex marriage, cheering that. And of course, the Democrats were very quiet. And then when he starts talking about, taking care of immigrants, taking care of refugees, helping the poor, criticizing capitalism, the Republicans got really quiet, the Democrats were applauding away. Because people do often have a very selective approach. I mean, the Bible that says, Leviticus rejecting presumably homosexuality also tells us to treat, the stranger among us as one of us. So, but people are going to pick, okay, against same-sex marriage, but I will ignore the part about, not oppressing, foreigners. That's a very selective approach. If God is really laying down the moral law, if one's being consistent, how can one simply say, well, I'll pick, it's not like an a la carte, like a smorgasbord, I'll take some of the French fries, I don't want any of this, or I'll take like some Leviticus, but not this other part, this other part. So it is a fair criticism. If morality truly is based on religion, a good question is, can someone say that morality is based on religion, we should do God's will, when they're just picking things they like and ignoring things they dislike? It's a fair point of concern, which also goes back to consistent application. If you say, well, my ethics is based on this, but I'm just going to ignore all this other stuff, is that a fair moral view? Now, one standard objection thrown out by kind of like atheist 101 stuff is the objection that morality is, religious morality is bad because religious people have done bad stuff. Now, this does raise an interesting question. Do the actions of followers of a particular religion or any belief system, does that affect the validity, the truth of the belief system? So if someone says, well, the Christians did, they had the Inquisition, they had the Crusade, you have people who go and, murder people in the name of their God. And if you look at, Islam, people, of ISIS doing terrible things in the name of Islam, does that disprove their faiths? Do the bad deeds of Christians disprove Christianity? Do the bad deeds of Muslims disprove Islam? Do the bad deed of Buddhists disprove Buddhism? Which is a fair question. Now, one way to approach this is the following way. Suppose there's a scientist who does bad stuff. Let's use a fictional example. We'll use Matt Damon. You ever saw the movie Interstellar? He plays an astronaut, who's on this planet, and he lies. And then he tries to kill Matthew McConaughey. But he doesn't succeed. He ends up dying himself. And he's kind of a bad guy. Now, if a scientist did that stuff for real, would that disprove science? Would you say, well, the scientist is a bad guy, science is wrong? No. So you could say, well, if people have to be Christian or Muslim or Jewish, do bad stuff, it need not disprove those faiths. Now, where you might have a concern is what's in the faith itself. Like if the faith says, do all kinds of evil stuff, like Satanism, for example, you might say, well, that faith is kind of evil. But in the light of people criticizing religions for being evil, etc., based on what the followers do, that's a very important question. Who defines the faith? Is Christianity defined by the worst Christians? Is Islam defined by ISIS? Is a political view defined by the very worst people of that view? Which is a fair question. Who truly defines that view? And one approach is, that people often take, they don't like the faith, they say, well, the worst people define it. And people like it say, well, no, those bad people are not part of the faith, it's only the good people that count. Again, these aren't objections against divine command theory, they're just concerns about basing ethics on religion. Okay, so that takes us through our brief adventure through divine command theory, religious-based ethics. Before segueing into another theoretical area, anything about this that needs more stuff? We now turn to a non-religious based ethics, known as consequentialism. Consequentialism is a value theory, but it need not be a moral theory, because you can have non-ethical, non-moral consequentialism. Not in the sense that it's evil, but in the sense that it's not dealing with ethics.
So consequentialism is this. It's the view, it's a normative view, so it tells you what you should do. It's a view the way you should try to do is assess actions based on their consequences. So the way you determine value is based on consequences of actions. So to put it maybe a little clearer, or perhaps less clear, basic idea is this. A consequentialist view is that when you assess something, what you look at in terms of doing your scoring is you look not at the action itself, or the motives for the action, or who's doing them. You look at the results, the consequences. To throw out some bumper sticker slogans, it'd be things like the greatest good for the greatest number, or a slightly meaner one, that the ends justify the means. Now, as I mentioned, this need not be a moral view. You could be a consequentialist about money. In fact, if you're running a business, you probably would be. Your objective is to maximize your money. Or if you're, a scientist investigating the frontiers of knowledge, your goal would be to maximize knowledge. Now, if you're a consequentialist, you basically got to do two things. Well, many more things, but here are two of the basic things. One is you got to define the scoring system. When you are assessing the consequences, you got to figure out what's your point system. What's the measure of value? And again, it depends on what sort of consequentialism you've got. One would be like money. If you're in business, you look at things in terms of what's the value is money. Or again, it might be knowledge, or it might be power, or fame, or Twinkies, or pepperoni pizza. I mean, those would be weird, but they would still be potentially consequentialist. Now, the second thing the consequentialist has to answer is this question. When you're doing the scoring, who counts? To use a crappy analogy, it's kind of like a soccer game. If a fan runs on the field and kicks the ball into the net, no point. So same with morality. Who counts when you're doing the assessment? And this can vary quite a bit. And what this is called in theory stuff is the relevant means, those who count. Now, to use a concrete example, in the case of business, when you're running a business, you want to maximize your profits. And it's your profits. You don't want to maximize your competitor's profits, so you're a consequentialist about it. What is success in business, defined consequentially, could be that, what is the value? Profits. Who counts? Me, my business. So your objective is to maximize the profits for you, not your competitors, not people down the street, not some other business, but for you. And again, this form of consequentialism itself is non-moral, because you can be trying to maximize anything. So the idea is actions are assessed based on their consequences, and the typical view is what you should do, normatively, is maximize value for the relevant beings. Maximize your profit, for example. Or if you're like an agent, maximize the fame of your client. And those would all be consequentialist approaches. Why do people like consequentialism? Well, one appeal is that when we're doing stuff, if we're thinking things through, should we consider the consequences? Typically, yeah. You should ask, I wonder what's going to happen if I do this. And as a matter of fact, we often do that. So one appeal is assessing consequences makes sense. Another reason is, of course, the idea is to maximize value. And if you value something, do you want more of that or less of that? Yeah, because more is better. Well, for good stuff. For bad stuff, you want less bad stuff. More money, less bills. So there's a variety of appeals to it. Now, since we're doing ethics and not other stuff, we'll quickly segue into some
moral forms of consequentialism. Our first one, and we'll look at two of the big ones. One is ethical egoism, which is all about me, in your case, all about you. And we'll also look at utilitarianism, which is all about everybody. Ethical egoism is a moral theory which is defined the following way. If I were an ethical egoist, my view would be this, that what I should do is take the actions that maximizes what is of value for me. Now, ethical egoists could differ about what's of value. It may be happiness, it could be pleasure, it might be maximizing my self-interest, etc. But the defining characteristic of ethical egoism is it's all about me. So the scope of morality, in terms of the relevant beings, I'm the only one that's relevant to me. If I'm an ethical egoist, I am the center of the morality. Now, as an ethical egoist, of course, I accept the same is true of you. For me, everything I do, I would judge what effect does this have on me? And you would do the same thing. What effect does this have on you? Now, other people might matter to me because they could affect me. It may be like kind of a nice way, like I feel bad, if bad stuff happens to them. Or maybe totally cynical, like if my minions, get killed, who's going to do my minion for me? Who's going to do my henchman stuff? Who's going to go and walk down the dark corridor and see if there's any, kind of traps there? Who's going to clean my, my test tubes and take care of my monsters? So that's the defining characteristic of ethical egoism. The goal is to maximize the value for, in my case, me. Now, the two competing kind of ethical teams, team egoism and team altruism, are these. Again, altruism, or rather egoism, is all about me. Maximizing value for me first, me last, me always, me only. Altruism is an opposing viewpoint. It's the view that at least some of the time you should consider the consequences of your actions on others. Roughly put, egoism is a view that only I matter, ultimately. And altruism, the view is that you should consider the value of others, so that people do or other things do matter. And of course, these are directly opposed, because, badly drawn cartoons, ethical egoism, it's me. Or in your case, you. That is the defining thing of morality. Everything is weighed in terms of its effect on me. If you're an altruist, though, you consider at least something other than yourself, other people, even one other person. But it's not all about you. Other people or things matter. And again, those are basically the two options. Either only I matter, or other stuff matters too, at least something that's not me. And as you might imagine, these two camps, team altruism, team egoism, have been battling for quite some time. So why do people like egoism? Well, one appeal is, it answers the question, why be good, pretty easily. Because being good, normally think of like being good as something that's going to be a real down. We're going to have to do stuff we don't like. But if you're an ethical egoist, by definition, good is what is good for you. It's what, crudely put, not entirely accurate, but crudely put, egoism is basically you do what's best for you. And that's pretty appealing. It's all about you. Why be good? Well, it's like asking, why should I do the very best thing for myself? It's a sensible question, but the answer seems pretty straightforward. It's like, well, why would I want anything less than the best for me? Now, another appeal is, people do argue this is the way people are. That as a matter of psychological fact, people are only concerned about themselves. If that were true, then ethical egoism would be a sensible morality, because it's the one that we could follow. Now, a little terminology for egoism. First, one type of egoism, which I briefly alluded to, is what's called psychological egoism. Now, this is not a moral theory. This is a descriptive psychological theory. This is the theory that as a matter of psychological fact, people are only concerned about their own self. They're not, their own self-interest. They're concerned about maximizing value for themselves, and as a matter of psychological fact, they are not concerned about others. And that's a psychological hypothesis. This is how people psychologically operate. Now, personal egoism, it's not like a personal like pizza or something, it's not like a small version just for you. It's a view that, well, it's basically selfishness. This is just, it's not a moral view, it's just, I do, crudely put, I do what I want. Screw everyone else. So this would just be straightforward selfishness. Not a moral view, it's just being selfish. Egotism, which is closely related, it's the view that a person is, they have a very, very high opinion of themselves. They're an egotist, as opposed to an egoist. They sound similar. But the difference is, egotism is having a very inflated sense of self-worth. I'm the very best. I don't want to pick on Donald Trump here, but I will pick on Donald Trump here. He has a lot of confidence. But of course, one person's egotism is another person's confidence. Now, ethical egoism, though, is different from these. It's the view, it's not a psychological view. It's not the view, this is what people are like, although people do often say, this is what people are like, and this morality nicely fits it, so let's go with that. And it's different from selfishness, because selfishness is just, crudely put, I do what I want. Ethical egoism is, I do what I want, and that's the right thing to do, crudely put. And egotism is basically, I'm the greatest, I'm the best. Whereas ethical egoism is, what matters is me. Now, a person could be an egotist and be an egoist, but they're different. So egoism is a moral view. Ethical egoism is that what I should do is what is best for me, and egotism is simply I am the best. Or, Before pressing on from these, anything about that stuff? The egoism or egotism that needs more.
You said ethical egoism is when you do what you want because it's the best option?
Well, ethical egoism is when you do, or crudely put, you do what you want, and that's the morally right thing to do. That, because personal egoism is just selfishness. I'm just selfish. I just do stuff because it's all about me. Egotism is, I'm the greatest, and ethical egoism is what's right for me to do is to do what's best for me, and that's morally correct. So this one is a psychological hypothesis. People just act out of self-interest. This is, hey there, I'm really selfish. This is, hey there, I'm really awesome. And this is, hey there, doing what's in my self-interest is what's morally correct. And also for you too. You should be doing the same thing, acting in your own self-interest. So this would be a moral theory. This is just having a big head. This is being selfish. And this is a psychological theory about how people behave. Now, a person could roll all of them together. They could be, they could believe this, they could be selfish, they could think they're great, and they could also be an ethical egoist, thinking they should act solely in their self-interest. Anything else? Now, historically, this view has been pretty popular, and there have been various and sundry arguments in its favor. One of the first ones, which is the foundation of capitalism, is from our good dead friend, Adam Smith. Adam Smith is the guy, well, you really can't say he invented capitalism, but I guess if you had to say, who really, kind of capitalism, laid out the theoretical foundations, it'd be Adam Smith. He wrote a work called The Wealth of Nations. If anybody is in business or political science, well worth reading, because people have called it the Bible of capitalism. So it lays out our free market, laissez-faire system. Now, Smith offered the following argument. And if you ever wondered, what is the theoretical foundation for people who are free marketers, libertarians, for example, Rand Paul, and people that are the Tea Party folks who express libertarian views, what's their theoretical philosophical foundation? Well, the classic ones would be Adam Smith, folks. Here's the idea. Smith put forth the view that here's how it would play out. we're going to act from rational self-interest in a business context. We're all out to maximize our profits. And let's use a modern, contemporary example. Suppose we're all app developers. We're trying to develop some new health apps for iPhones and Android, because health apps are apparently the big thing for the future. And if you got like an Apple device, you've got a little Apple Health app on there. If you've got the Apple Watch, it ties into that. I don't have that. I just got a rubber band and a pedal. But anyways, not that. But suppose we're developing these apps. Now here's how Adam Smith theory would kind of work, using it as an example. The idea is, of course, we're all acting for self-interest. We all want to be like the guy who owns Snapchat. We want to be billionaires, within like a couple of 4 years. And here's his theory: we're going to compete with each other in a free market. You'll create an app, you'll create an app, we'll all create apps, and then they'll be put in the Android market, the Google Play, maybe on, and for the iPhone, of course, they'll be on the App Store for Apple, and we'll compete. And what will happen is, when we're competing with each other, here's how it would work. In order for you to sell more apps, you've got to have either a better app than everyone else, or it's got to be cheaper. But if you lower your price, other people will lower their price too. If you add some improvements, now it supports Apple Watch, now supports new stuff, everyone else is going to have to do that too. And the theory is, by competing with each other, we'll create better products for lower prices for everyone. And this will work out for the common good, because by acting in our self-interest, trying to compete with each other, it'll be good because you'll have good stuff, better stuff at lower prices. And that's the theory. That's the ideal of the laissez-faire economics, the free market. And his claim was the invisible hand of the market would work things out. Now, he doesn't mean like there's like a, really invisible hand going, but it's sort of a shorthand for the stuff we don't see, all the interactions between things that bring about supposedly this good stuff. And so the reason why that's an argument for ethical egoism, the idea is, by me acting in my own self-interest will be good for me, but it's also, interestingly enough, or boringly enough, supposedly good for everyone, because you get to be a billionaire and everyone gets better apps. At least that's the theory. Now, what are the criticisms? Well, one, the standard criticism is to point to history. If you look at when the United States had the freest of free markets, in a sense back in the 1920s, we had, of course, followed by the Great Depression. Because one thing that happens is, instead of the ideal of we all compete, everyone wins, you end up with like one winner and a bunch of losers. So, your app becomes $1 billion app, everyone else goes broke because their app doesn't make it. And we end up with, critics would say we end up with what we have now. We have, less than 1% of the population controlling the vast majority of the wealth, because it's, the free market competition, everyone acting selfishly, means a lot of people get screwed over. At least that's a criticism. That's kind of the Bernie Sanders criticism. And people on the right say, well, we just got to keep freeing up that market, keep the competition going, and everybody wins. And then people, point up to history and say that has never, ever worked. But interesting enough, that's our upcoming election in 2016, still has that kind of debate. If you listen to the Republican candidates, they are typically advocating Adam Smith style, free market, low regulation, competition makes everybody better. And people on the left, like Bernie Sanders, are making, a counter-argument. That if you look at the Depression, the current economic state, there are winners, few, but many, many losers. And so when 2016 comes time to vote, we'll be revisiting the old Adam Smith system. Before we go away from Smith, and again, I do him a terrible injustice because, again, he wrote a fundamental book laying down the fundamentals of capitalism, so well worth looking into, but alas, we must move on. Before moving to Ayn Rand, anything about Smith that needs more Smith stuff. Now, if you want to be a good capitalist, you've got to read Adam Smith. If you want to be a good socialist, you've got to read Adam Smith as well. Ayn Rand. Now, if you follow American politics at all, you've probably heard of the Tea Party. They're the tax enough already folks. And one of their sort of philosophical champions, in addition to Adam Smith as kind of the classic laissez-faire, has been Ayn Rand. And there were people, they used to have the big Tea Party rallies, people would carry signs saying, who is, or John Galt, or I am John Galt. And it's a reference to Ayn Rand's, novels, Atlas Shrugged. And Rand's view was basically, in some ways, similar to Adam Smith. What she's advocating is pretty much hardcore ethical egoism. And here's her boiled down quite a bit. Again, she wrote, wrote several books. If you want to get the full Ayn Rand, story, you'd want to read, her classic essay, The Virtue of Selfishness, also in book form as well. But here's a condensed version of it. Now, she agrees with Aristotle and Confucius that our objective in life is happiness. So if you had Aristotle, Confucius, and Ayn Rand walk into a bar, and then Plato ducks. So, yeah, it's a bad joke. So if you had them in a bar and you asked them, hey, what's the goal of life? They would say, I'll say happiness. But here's where Ayn Rand would kind of differ from, those other dead gods. She would say this. She says, basically we've got two options in life. Ethical egoism and altruism. In other words, we can look out for our self-interest, me first, me last, me always, me only, or we can be total altruists, looking out only for other people, but never for ourselves. Now, so those are only two options. So it's like a, celebrity fight club. Ethical egoism versus altruism. And this is, roughly put, I look out for my own self-interest. Myself, me first, me last, me always, crudely put. Altruism is a view that I look out for everyone but myself. I sacrifice my interest for the interest of others. And the objective, of course, is to achieve happiness. And she doesn't do this, but I'll use a crappy analogy to illustrate it. Imagine we have Mount Metaphor. And on top of Mount Metaphor is happiness. And the objective is you've got to get to the top of the mountain to get happiness. And her view is that there's a lot of happiness. Everyone's got happiness waiting for them at the top of the mountain. So it's available to everyone. And you have two strategies. One is you focus on getting yourself to the top of the mountain. The other option is that you spend all your energy trying to get other people to the top of the mountain. Now, if you spend all your energy trying to get yourself to the top of the mountain, what's going to happen? Probably.
Get tired.
Yeah, you get tired, but eventually it'll happen.
Because you're tired.
Yeah, you'll get there. You'll be like, yay, got my happiness. You fall off the mountain. No, gravity. You defeated me again. Now, if you're spending all your time trying to help other people, you're sort of like, to use a crappy analogy, it's kind of like, where someone's standing at the door saying, you first. No, you first. No, you first. I'll hold the door for you. No, I want to hold the door for you. And everybody will be squirting around at the base of the mountain, and no one's going to be happy. Because everyone's going to be wasting all their time on each other, and no one's going to achieve their goal. I mean, again, that's kind of crudely put. You'd want to read the entire Virtue of Selfishness if you want a full deal. But the gist of our argument is, if you focus on achieving your own goals and acting in your self-interest, you'll achieve your happiness. If you spend all your time ignoring your own interest and spending all your time serving the interests of others, you'll be exhausted and you won't achieve your goals. No one will achieve their goals. So our argument is that everyone is worse off if we're all altruists, if we're all trying to help each other and not help ourselves. And what we should do is be selfish. She calls it the virtue of selfishness. If you are selfish, you will achieve happiness, but so will everyone else. Now, the reason why she's well loved by many of the folks in the Tea Party is because of ethical egoism. So her advocation is, you look out for yourself, you do not look out for others. This goes along very well with laissez-faire capitalism. You don't have social programs, because that's altruism, you're helping others. You don't have, say, financial aid for people, because that's helping others. You don't have, social programs, because that's helping others. You look out for yourself. You serve your self-interest. Which is why the character in the Atlas Shrugged is an ethical egoist. He's looking out for himself. And of course, since he's writing the novel, he has great success. And people who are critical say, well, that's just selfishness. I mean, in her scenario, it works, she's telling the story, appeal of intuition. So what's the main objection to Ayn Rand? Well, one was put forth by a philosopher, the classic one is Louis Pojman. I'm probably butchering his name, so I apologize. But he said this is a false dilemma. And a false dilemma is a fallacy where you give people two options, usually one is very bad, as if they're the only two, and don't present any other alternatives. Now, if this was truly our only options, look out for ourselves or just, engage in totally stupid, irrational altruism, then Ron would probably be right. Because, if the choice between being selfish and sacrificing everything for other people, I guess selfishness would be the better choice. But are those our only options? Total selfishness or total stupid altruism, where you never care about yourself at all? No, I mean, there's a lot of options. You could be selfish some of the time, but you could care about other people, at least some other people. And so there's many other options. And what other people who are critical have argued is that pure selfishness ends up with everyone being, well, you may have a few people who are well off, but most people will be worse off. And ultimately, if you have total selfishness, everyone will be worse off. Because as we'll see when we get to Hobbes, total selfishness is a total disaster. Unless you can have people to crush people. We'll see that next time. But if you have altruism, people cooperating, you could argue we're all better off. And again, tying this into the 2016 election, the Tea Party wing, as I mentioned, explicitly endorses Ayn Rand, like Ayn Rand. And the idea basically is you act in your own self-interest. You do not engage in altruism, because that's weakens others and you're wasting resources. And of course, Bernie Sanders he's expressing what can be seen as an altruistic view. He's talking about, financially, free college, social support, etc. And so you have kind of that classic dispute, a dispute over what is better for the individual, what is better for society, selfishness or altruism. And depending on your view on that, and depending if you vote, most people don't vote, you'll decide how you vote in 2016. So we'll get there, unless Google kills us all. Okay, so that brings the end of the stuff, and next time we'll go on to our good dead friend Thomas Hobbes, looking at ethical egoism, Hobbes style.